in Stevens Point. For the past 15 years, she has worked as a soil scientist for the NRCS Soil Survey, and for the past 3 years as the Assistant State Soil Scientist and Soil Health Specialist for Minnesota NRCS. She is passionate about soils education and outreach, and her main focus is working with agency personnel, partners, and Minnesota producers to promote and implement soil health practices on agricultural lands. So, Kristin?
Thanks, everybody. So today, what I wanted to talk about with you is that there's been a lot of progress with the regenerative movement this year. And I was fortunate enough to attend some really incredible conferences, just like this one, and workshops in our neighboring states and in Minnesota. So with the little time that I have with you today, and any of you who know me, limiting me to 20 minutes is going to be really tough, so I'm calling you and watching your cards. So with this time that I have with you today, my goal is to share with you some of the highlights from these workshops and conferences, some of the things that I've learned from the farmers and from the other scientists who spoke, the things that made me look hard or think differently about some of the things we've heard a lot about in this movement. So I want to share these with you in the hope that you can use this information in the work that you do or with the producers that you work with, or that you discover a new resource, because that's really huge, a person that you can go to with specific questions on some of these things. So a lot of this may not be the first time you hear some of these, but even if some of this is review, hopefully you can take away a new bit of information and a new way of looking at something. So this last October, we've heard about this already, Gustavus here hosted the Nobel Conference on the Living Soil. Dr. David Montgomery also spoke there as well. But the thing to know is that every single one of those presentations is available to view on YouTube. So if you just go online and just search for Nobel, you can watch all of these amazing people talk about soil health in a very different way. This past November, the Burleigh County and Morton County SWCDs and NRCS hosted their Regenerating Soil with Diversity Summit in Bismarck. The speakers were almost entirely farmers from all across the country and Canada, sharing their stories about their journey with soil health. All of these speakers can also be viewed online. That whole program was taped. If you go to the Minokan Farm webpage, you can access all of those videos. Not only that, all of the speaker bios and their contact information, we have that list over at the NRCS table. So that's really key. They talked a lot about relay cropping at this conference. If that's something you're interested in or you've heard your producers talk about, please watch these videos. There was a tremendous amount of information in there, and contact these producers. That's the beautiful thing about this. They will answer the questions that you have, and they're freely open to sharing their information with you. Not only that, they just hosted their Farming and Ranching for the Bottom Line at the end of February. That also was taped and can also be there, working on uploading everything to the Minokan page within the next couple of weeks. Not only that, over 350, we also heard about this in the opening comments, over 350 people signed up for the Conservation Tillage Conference in December in Fargo this year. Not only that, but Iowa State puts on every other year a Science for Soil Health conference that's really outstanding. So if you don't, or if you haven't already attended some of these conferences, I really can't recommend them enough. We're really fortunate here in Minnesota to have ready access to some of the best, what I think some of the best soil health programming in the country. So back in November, Gabe started his talk in Bismarck with this quote from Don Campbell. So Don is a farmer in Saskatchewan. He's an educator with Holistic Management International, and he's inspired a lot of the innovative farmers across the country. And he says, if you want to make small changes, change the way you do things. But if you want to make major changes, we have to change the way we see things. So really, I think to start, I think the important thing is that we need to understand what's truly happening, and to see it, we have to start with the foundation of soil health, and that's soil structure. So soil's primary particles of sand, silt, clay, organic matter, all of these pieces make up the building blocks of our structure, and this is the habitat for our soil organisms. So good structure, that's really critically important to ensure our soil environment remains aerobic. So I recently saw a talk by Dr. Elaine Ingham that got me thinking a little bit differently about soil structure. So she's a microbiologist, she's the founder of Soil Food Web, and Dr. Ingham says the smallest structure in our soil The microaggregates, the submicroaggregates are built by bacteria. And fungal filaments take those tiny microaggregates and build them together to make the walls, the ceilings, the floor of our structure. And as we build and we're pulling these pieces together, we now have space for oxygen, water, and roots to move and grow. And we need that oxygen in our soil so that the good guys grow and not the bad guys. So the pathogens, the pests require and thrive in reduced oxygen environments. And they need to do that in order to beat and outcompete the good guys. So maintaining these air passageways are critical for the soil. So reducing compaction, building good soil structure, creating these air passageways, that's the difference between soil and dirt. So these pore spaces, so I apologize for those of you that were with me last night, you've seen this before, but these empty spaces, this is a three-dimensional CT scan of healthy soil pores. So I want you to think about our own human bodies. What does this picture remind you of? Think about our own bodies, right? Veins and arteries, right? So the pore spaces in our soil act very similar to our own veins and arteries in our body. They're in charge of moving the resources, the oxygen, the nutrients, to the plant roots and to the biology that require that to thrive. But when we apply tillage, that's really interrupting and destroying these passageways that are so critical for our soils to be able to function. So not only that, but when it rains on the soil surface and that water starts to move down through these passageways, it actually creates a bit of a vacuum. So as the water moves down, it's pulling oxygen down into the soil. So if you think about it, when it rains, your soil takes a breath. Isn't that amazing to think that our soil breathes? It's incredible. So building good soil structure, maintaining this porosity, all really depends on building carbon, organic matter. That's been a huge theme that we talked about today. So to do this, we want to mimic Mother Nature. So rarely in nature do we see a single species of plant growing anywhere in a single place. And that's because Mother Nature's diversity or her ecosystems thrive through diversity. And here you can see the variety of plant root depths that we see in our native prairie ecosystems. And that's why our prairie soils, and in soil science we call them mollisols. They're deep, dark, rich soils, and they're the most productive soils in the country. So Lauren Steinlange was one of the farmers who spoke in Bismarck. And Lauren farms 1,500 acres near West Union, Iowa, and their operation is evolving into a companion or a relay no-till system that focuses on this rotation that keeps that living root growing in the soil as long as possible during the growing season. So he's got corn, soybean, cereal rye, winter wheat, barley, buckwheat, and this is what that rotation looks like over the course of several growing seasons. So he's got a living root in that soil, constantly sinking carbon into that system, constantly feeding his biology, building soil structure. And when we look at a traditional corn and soybean rotation underneath that arrow there, you can see what a dramatic difference that is. So this map here shows the distribution of soil organic matter across our soils across the country. What do you notice about Minnesota? We're really, really lucky here because when the glaciers came, they didn't just drop nutrient-rich topsoil for us, right? It took life. It took thousands of years of living roots constantly sinking that carbon into our soil. And the only reason we have this natural abundant source of carbon is because we are historically under prairie and forest ecosystems. Not only that, coupled with cold temperatures and ample precipitation and thousands of years of this soil building, that's what really built that carbon. But every time human nature is faced with an overabundance of a resource, what do we do with it? Every time. Passenger pigeons, the bison, the great northern forest. We utilize it, we use it, and abuse it until it's gone. And the carbon in our soil is no different. It is not an infinite resource, it's finite. And the sooner we start to manage for it, the better off we're going to be. So Dr. Montgomery actually showed this, and I think it's a really powerful graphic, and that's why you'll see it quite a bit. So even though we just saw how lucky we are and how rich our soils are, it doesn't mean that they can't also be degraded. So even though we have this tremendous abundant source of carbon, we are also working with some of the most degraded soils in the world. So it's because of high intensity agriculture. It's the way that we're managing it. So under these systems, these soils are hemorrhaging carbon, energy, our most valuable resource. They're bleeding to death. And when we focus on only singular things, on no-till alone or cover crops alone, we really need to look at a systems approach to fully capture this carbon. So we're expected to feed a projected 10 billion people by 2050 on a degraded resource. And if the world's population continues to grow at its current rate, we'll have to produce as much food in the next 40 years as we have in the past 500. How are we going to do that? We need to feed the world on soils where we've removed half of our pre-settlement organic matter. Dr. Montgomery also talked about this earlier. So Dr. Ratan Lal, who's a professor of soil science at The Ohio State University, he's also a recipient of a Nobel Peace Prize, has done his life's work on carbon capture and ensuring food security. So he estimates that over the last 150 years, some of the world's prime farmland has lost over 70% of their carbon. So this soil dysfunction also impacts human health. So Dr. Chris Nichols says we live on some of the most productive land in the US and Canada, and in both US and Canada we're suffering from obesity and malnutrition in the same people. Have we forgotten that our food comes from the soil? So over the last 70 plus years, the level of every nutrient and almost every kind of food has fallen. Because if it's not in the soil, it's not in our food because we mined it out. So an individual today would need to consume twice as much meat, 3 times as much fruit, 4 times as many vegetables to get the same amount of mineral content as those same foods from 1940. So how are we going to support feeding a growing population on a depleted resource? How are we going to do this? By doing the same thing we've always done, the same way we've always done it, because that's the way our grandparents have done it before us. What is the definition of insanity? Doing the same thing over and over and expecting different results, right? So what has doing the same thing gotten us? This is 80 years difference. We've got the Dust Bowl on the one side and 2017 on the other. Gosh, they look the same, don't they? Right, this is Nebraska last year, South Dakota, Clay County, Monoman, Sibley. It's happening here too. This is our problem too. So we need to stop exporting our topsoil, stop mining the resource, and start building it back with biology. So how do we grow more food with less disturbance, less inputs? We need to feed the soil food web. When that soil becomes alive, you start farming biology with biology, that's when the magic happens. So soil is home to the largest, most diverse concentration of living organisms on planet Earth. Dr. Nichols talked about how conventional management uses inputs to control unwanted invertebrates and fungi, to supplement nutrient cycling. But our attempts at controlling Mother Nature are failing. We have increased herbicide and pesticide resistance. It damages beneficial organisms. It creates lazy plants. So every organism is genetically programmed to be lazy. It's the conservation of resources, right? Life is programmed to do things in the most efficient manner possible. So if we give plants all of the inorganic nutrients it needs, it's not going to invest in building those robust root systems. It's not going to invest in building those beneficial relationships that it needs to cycle the nutrients. So again, this has been said 100 times. How do we do this? I think it's really important that this needs to be our mantra. We need to ask ourselves before any decision is made if we're utilizing the systems approach. But this needs to come with the understanding that it takes time, because we're not starting with a pristine, untouched resource, we're starting with a degraded one. This all depends on trial and error. There's no manual. It's different from farm to farm, field to field, year to year. So at the Bismarck Summer, no matter which farmer spoke, they came all saying the same thing, that the best learning happens when things go wrong. Experimentation opens the door to opportunity. They're learning by doing. They're not jumping into the deep end with both feet. They're making sure that their trials and experiments work within their business model and do not put them at undue financial risk. The scale of the experiment is not what matters. What they learn does, and how they take what they learned and apply it to the next growing season, that's what's important. My dad always said this, things worth doing are rarely easy, right? So Dr. Jonathan Lundgren also spoke in Bismarck. Dr. Montgomery mentioned him before too. So he looks at the ecological risk of pest management. So he talked about how in high intensity agriculture, we're working with a simplified system because it's easier to control and it's easier to understand. So some say that the only solutions that we have include pesticides and tillage, but that's because we've oversimplified our system. So we're only looking at 2 tools between 2 damaging things, but there are other tools. So we just need to understand that it's going to take constant experimentation and trial and error, and the sooner we stop trying to control Mother Nature and work with her, 5 minutes, that's it. Oh my gosh, we have so much to talk about. Okay, so another repeating theme that I took away, we kind of talked about this already. So these are the mycorrhizal associations that we build, and Dr. Montgomery talked about this. If you can form that relationship with the mycorrhizal fungi, it extends the reach of that root to access more nutrients, and they also use it as a communication mechanism. This was my favorite. If you watch any of the Nobel Conference talks, watch this one. This one was amazing. So this is Dr. Suzanne Zimmer. She's a professor of forest ecology at the University of British Columbia. So her research focuses on these mycorrhizal associations, the fungal networks that connect coastal old-growth forests beneath the soil. And what she discovered is that everything is connected through fungal networks, not just forest ecosystems, that the majority of all plant life, some 80 to 90%, form these networks. And there's a constant sharing of resources, nutrients, water, carbon from the plants that have to the plants that don't. And not only that, but in these native diverse forest communities, there are these old hub trees. She called them mother trees. And not only do these mother trees pass resources to the smaller saplings, but they recognize their own kin. They recognize their own children, and they pass more resources to their children trees. Not only that, she found that the saplings that can form these mycorrhizal associations have survival rates 4 times higher than those that don't. And that's not, they also stressed these mother trees, and they found out when these trees thought that they were dying, they shuttled even more resources out to those neighboring trees. But not only that, they sent out these distress signals, these warning signals to their neighbors. This is the incredible part. The recognition of those warnings became part of the neighboring tree's DNA, and they passed that recognition on to the next generation of trees. So not only are they sharing resources and communicating, but they're teaching one another. Isn't that not amazing? It's incredible. So we can take what Dr. Zimmer's doing and apply that to production agriculture. The sooner we stop farming for a single plant, for a single crop, the more we realize and we understand that we need to manage for a community below ground, that we need to promote a soil environment with robust, connected biological connections, the healthier and more resilient that's going to be. So, what else has this year taught us? Not that it needs to be said, we've all been living it, but even by Minnesota standards, this has been one heck of a winter. This latest storm from the weekend held over 1 inch of moisture. They're predicting anywhere from 1 to 4 over the next couple of days. Not only that, possible 50-degree temps by Wednesday. We all have talked about the flooding outlooks. They're saying a lot of the forecast points indicate at least 50% probability of reaching major flood stage. So at the core of soil health is building a resilient system that can function in these extremes. So one of the other speakers in Bismarck was Jimmy Emmons. So he owns and manages 2,000 acres of cropland and 5,000 acres of range in Oklahoma. He's been no-till since '95. He's also won the Oklahoma Leopold Conservation Award. So one of these this picture came from one of the producers that he works with. So on the field on the left has been under soil management for 4 years, the one on the right under conventional. So this farmer called him after 5.3 inches, just completely excited. And he said, the rain from my neighbor's field is coming over the road and into my field, and even that's infiltrating, he said. And then 3 weeks later, it happened again. So sewn into all of these talks, these conferences and workshops, well actually one of the things that Jimmy really wants everybody to know is that you're going to look at these pictures and you're going to say, well, this is Oklahoma, or this is North Dakota, this is Minnesota, it doesn't work here, right? We live in a vacuum. Nothing's going to work here, right? No, he says it's not that soil health isn't going to work here, but recognize it's going to work differently, that these practices need to be adjusted to fit the climate. So everybody talks about urgency, right? The time to act is now. So more and more we're seeing these massive precipitation events. So the DNR Climate Office has a list of mega rain events that have occurred since statehood. So that's any event that's 6 inches or more over 1,000 square miles, and the core of the event is 8 inches. So if you look at this graph here, if we just look from the 70s onward, there's been 11 mega events with a sharp uptick since 2000. So in the 18 years since 2000, we've seen nearly 3 times as many mega events then from 73 to 99. So resilience is thriving amid diversity. So we have to ask ourselves, what have we done in the previous growing season to make our soil be able to handle the worst that Mother Nature throws at us? 2 more slides, I swear. So soil health, why do we do it? Other than improving the resiliency and functionality of our soil, we need to do it because what we're facing now is a consumer who's demanding higher quality food. 7 of the 10 largest producers in the world mention soil or soil health on their websites. Whole Foods has a responsibly grown rating system label. And the top thing that they look at is soil health. Jay Fear had me come out to General Mills' international headquarters in Minneapolis, where they had him do a thing on soil health. They had over 400 of their employees at headquarters say they were interested in learning more. They were live streaming the event and sending it to their employees in China and Brazil. So just last week, General Mills committed to expanding regenerative ag by 2030, over 1 million acres. So starting with oats grown in the northern plains, wheat, corn, sugar beets over the next decade, General Mills wants to see farmers incorporate 3 of the 5 principles to be included in those 1 million acres. The food scientists, the product developers, the people who make decisions about the food we eat, and that goes on the grocery shelf stores are paying attention to how that food is grown, because their consumers are demanding it. So I know it's really easy to come to these things, these events, and get really excited about soil health, and you leave and you're like, this is the best idea ever, and you go home and you're like, this is gonna be fun, this is harder than I thought, this is gonna be a lot of work, this sucks, and I have no idea what I'm doing. And it's really easy to get home and try to put this into practice and end up in this dark swamp of despair, right? But we want you to know, SFA wants you to know, NRCS, all of the partners that are here, we are here to help you succeed. We are here as a resource for you to get over. So through belief and persistence, we will get over this dark swamp of despair. We'll say, okay, but it still sucks. Quick, let's call it a day and say we learned something. Hey, wow, this is one of the proudest things I've ever done. You can do this. We can do this. These are some of the resources that you can use. NRCS has unlocked the secrets of soil. There's a ton of content on YouTube. University of Minnesota is fantastic. Jody will talk about some of her resources later. Minnesota NRCS is telling stories of Minnesota farmers. If you want to see some of the specifics about how are we making this work, go to the Minnesota NRCS YouTube channel. Life begins and ends in the soil. Everything is connected through the soil. The other reason I love coming to these conferences is seeing rooms filled with people, because it gives me hope that real change is going to happen, that real change is happening. And if we all work together, we can make a difference.